Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale brings a lesson, a moment of growth, and a chance to reflect. Today's story is about standing your ground when faced with adversity. How one quiet student's strength and discipline turned the tables against a school bully. In a world where confidence and power are often misunderstood, this story shows us that sometimes true strength lies in control, silence, and choosing when to act. Join us as we dive into a journey of self-respect, justice, and the profound impact of standing firm. Let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales. The first time I set foot in Lincoln High, I couldn't help but notice how different it felt. It wasn't like the schools I had known. Back in Atlanta, schools were alive with energy, walls covered in student murals, music blaring from the stairwells, and a vibrant buzz that filled every corner. But Lincoln High felt sterile, almost too perfect. Everything looked polished to a fault. The glass windows reflected the world outside with such precision that it almost seemed unreal. The floors glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the hallways stretched out too orderly for a place that was supposed to be full of teenagers. This wasn't what I was used to. My mom had called it a fresh start when we moved here. But I wasn't sure what that meant yet. My dad, always more direct, had called it a necessary change. The truth was, I didn't know what to think. The moment I walked through those front doors, I could feel it. People were watching, not staring exactly. That would have been too obvious, but it was the quick glances, the barely whispered comments, and the way some of them looked me over from head to toe before quickly turning away. It wasn't hard to tell what they were thinking. Who's this guy? I wasn't small by any means. At 5 feet 10, I had the kind of build that came from years of training. Not just working out, lean, controlled muscle. I moved with a quiet confidence, the kind my dad had drilled into me since I was little. My posture was always straight, never slouching. I didn't speak much, but that didn't mean I didn't notice. I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, deciding whether or not I fit into their world. The thing about being new is that you can't help but feel like an outsider. And for them, that's all I was. I made it through the front office and picked up my schedule without incident. The receptionist was polite, overly so, as though trying to make up for something. When I walked out, I saw them, a group of students near the lockers. The tallest one, a guy with perfectly styled blonde hair, stood leaning against the lockers like he owned the place. Ryan Foster. According to the roster, he was flanked by two others, laughing at something he had just said. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was meant to be heard. Just enough for the target to know they were the joke. I wasn't the target yet, but I could feel it coming. Ryan gave me a look, not exactly hostile, but definitely not welcoming. It was the kind of look someone gives when they're deciding whether or not to make trouble out of you. I'd seen it before. He smirked, leaned towards one of his friends, and said something low enough that I couldn't hear. The other two chuckled, giving me just a little too long of a glance. I didn't react. I simply exhaled slowly through my nose and walked past them, ignoring it. I had nothing to prove. I had been taught that strength isn't about showing off. It's about knowing when to walk away. And so, I walked away, holding my head up, letting them stew in their own frustration. But the thing about guys like Ryan, guys who thrive on making others feel small, is that they don't like being ignored. I knew this wasn't the last time we'd cross paths. But at the time, I didn't know just how bad things were going to get. It didn't take long for me to figure out the unspoken rules of Lincoln High. I had only been there a few days, but already I could tell how things worked. The athletes ran the show. The rich kids acted like royalty. And everyone else found a way to exist without drawing too much attention to themselves. Where did I fit in? I wasn't loud. I wasn't looking for trouble. But I wasn't timid either. I was somewhere in between. And that alone was enough to make me stand out. I could already tell that Ryan Foster wasn't the type of guy to let something go. Especially not when he felt like someone was resisting him. I noticed the little things first, small pushes in the hallways. A shoulder bump here, a muttered, "Watch where you're going," there. In class, He knocked my notebook off my desk and then flashed that smirk. Like he was testing me, waiting to see how I would react. But I gave him nothing. He tried again, using words this time. Didn't know they let kids from the hood in here. He sneered one day in history class. Loud enough for me to hear but soft enough that a teacher wouldn't catch it. Mercer, you ever think about trying out for football? I mean, you people are good at that, right? I felt my hands clench under the desk. The tension starting to build in my chest. I didn't speak. I didn't respond. I wasn't about to let him drag me into his game. But it was hard. It was so hard to just sit there and do nothing. The thing about bullying is that it wears you down. Little by little, you can try to ignore it. But the constant weight of it presses on you, making you second guess yourself. I thought about talking to my dad. But I already knew what he'd say. Handle it with discipline. He'd tell me, don't stoop to their level. And my mom? She'd want me to go to a teacher or talk to the principal. But I knew that wouldn't help. Not with Ryan. Not with someone who was popular and had the whole school backing him. Whether they admitted it or not. So, I did what I always did. I ignored it. But it was getting harder to ignore. Especially when things took a turn for the worse. By the time Friday came around, I had grown used to the little jabs from Ryan and his crew. It had become almost predictable, the shoulder bumps, the muttered insults, the deliberate attempts to get under my skin. I still didn't react, not because I was scared, but because I wasn't about to give them what they wanted. The silence was the hardest part. It was as if I was invisible, a ghost in their world. And that didn't bother me, until lunch that day. I remember sitting at one of the round tables in the cafeteria. Just trying to get through the day. It had been a long week. And I had enough on my plate already. The last thing I needed was trouble. So, I set my tray down. Minding my own business. Trying to eat in peace. It was almost a routine by now. The clatter of trays. The murmur of voices. The shuffle of footsteps. It all faded into the background as I took my first bite of my lunch. But then, as if fate had other plans for me, a shadow fell over my table. I looked up, and there they were, Ryan and his two sidekicks, Brandon and Zach. Ryan's grin was wide, almost predatory. He was clearly enjoying the attention he was getting from the other students around us. He leaned over me, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been wondering, how come you don't talk much? Mercer? What? Cat got your tongue? He said with a smirk. I didn't answer him. Instead, I calmly took another bite of my food, trying to ignore him. That wasn't good enough for Ryan. He snatched the apple off my tray and tossed it across the cafeteria. Watching it land near the drink station with a dull thud. A few heads turned, and for a moment, it felt like the whole cafeteria was holding its breath, waiting to see how I would react. I set my fork down carefully, the noise of the cafeteria dimming in my mind as I focused on Ryan. This time, I met his gaze, eyes locked with his. Steady and unwavering. I could feel his grin widen. Thinking he had broken me. I wasn't afraid, and I wasn't going to back down. But Ryan, like most bullies, couldn't see that. He shoved my shoulder hard. The movement was loud enough for everyone to hear. A physical challenge that seemed to echo through the room. Come on, Mercer, do something, he taunted. It was then that something shifted inside me. All the advice my dad had given me over the years came flooding back. Strength isn't about showing off, son. It's about knowing when to walk away. When to control the situation. Not let it control you. I exhaled slowly, my muscles already coiling. Controlled, ready for the moment. I didn't jump up in anger. I didn't shout back. I didn't do anything rash. Instead, I pushed my chair back slowly, deliberately, and stood up. No rush, no panic, just calm. Controlled movements, like a man stretching before a workout. Ryan's smirk only grew wider. He thought he had me cornered now. Oh, we got a tough guy here. Ryan chuckled, looking to his friends for validation. You gonna swing, Mercer? You gonna act like a thug now? I didn't flinch. I didn't react at all. But I examined Ryan carefully. Like he was a problem to be solved. His confidence wavered for just a split second, like he was suddenly aware that I wasn't the easy target he thought I was. But by then, it was already too late. Ryan reached out again, shoving me. This time, I moved faster than he could process. Before his hands fully extended, I grabbed his wrist with my left hand in one smooth motion. My right hand came up just as quickly, locking onto his elbow. I pivoted slightly, using his own momentum against him. Before he knew what happened, Ryan was on his back, his feet in the air, his body crashing to the cafeteria floor with a thud. The entire cafeteria went quiet. Conversations stopped. Even the lunch staff behind the counter seemed to freeze. Watching from a distance, Ryan lay there, gasping, utterly shocked. His body sprawled out on the tile as he struggled to sit up. His friends took a step forward, but I didn't even look at them. I crouched down beside Ryan, my voice low but clear. "Don't touch me again." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult. It was just a statement of fact. And that was what made it so much worse for him. He wasn't just defeated. He was dismissed. I stood up, dusted off my hands like I had just moved a chair instead of a person, and picked up my tray. I didn't even glance back as I walked away. The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. Students stared, not knowing what to say or do. Then, somewhere in the back of the room, a voice whispered, "Holy sh*T." The floodgates opened. Whispers turned into murmurs. Those murmurs turned into excited conversations. And by the end of lunch, the whole school was talking about what had just happened. Someone had caught the entire thing on their phone. And within minutes, videos and texts were flying through the school like wildfire. Ryan, the popular jock, had been taken down in front of everyone, and it wasn't even a fight. It was just one clean, effortless move, and that made it all the more impossible to ignore. When the bell rang at the end of the day, the atmosphere at Lincoln High had already changed. People who had barely noticed me before were now looking at me like I was someone new, someone powerful. Ryan, on the other hand, was left sitting on the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into tight fists. I knew he would never forget what had happened, but I also knew that this wasn't over yet. The silence after the storm was always the calm before the real battle. And I had a feeling that this was just the beginning. By the time I left Lincoln High that day, I felt the shift, the whispers, the stares, everything had changed. It wasn't that I wanted attention. I had never asked for it. I just wanted to exist without constantly being tested. But that was the price I had to pay. The moment I had stood up to Ryan, it felt like something inside me had cracked wide open. I had made a choice. A stand. It wasn't about fighting, it was about something deeper. It was about showing that there are consequences for every action, no matter how small or large. The next morning, I could feel it in the air before I even stepped inside the school. The sideways glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked past. It was all confirmation that my world had shifted overnight. Some students seemed to look at me with new respect, but I could tell some of them were just looking for entertainment, waiting for the next chapter in a story that had now become their personal drama. I reached my locker, and two freshmen, faces wide-eyed, darted out of my way without saying a word. A junior I didn't even know nodded at me, an approving look in his eyes. I had become something else in their eyes, someone to be revered or feared, and in some cases, both. But that wasn't respect. That wasn't what I wanted. They weren't looking at me as a person. They were looking at me as a spectacle. A rumor come to life. Then I saw Ryan. He was standing by his usual spot near the main entrance. But something was different. Gone was the cocky smirk. The easy confidence was missing. Instead, he stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides. His usual entourage, Zach and Brandon, flanked him, but there were no laughs now. There was no mocking. The atmosphere around them had shifted too. They weren't the kings of the school anymore. They were just another group of students, trying to reclaim some sense of dignity after what had happened in the cafeteria. Ryan looked at me for a brief second before quickly looking away. The challenge, the arrogance, everything that had defined him just days before, had evaporated. And for a moment, I almost smirked. Almost. But I knew better than to think it was over. Guys like Ryan don't just let things go. They don't forget. They wait. And I knew that when the time came, he would try again. It wasn't a question of if, but when. At lunch, the tension was palpable. As soon as I entered the cafeteria, I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations. They were waiting for something. Maybe for Ryan to come storming across the room for a rematch. Or maybe for me to lose my cool. But Ryan wasn't even in the room. His usual table was empty. I was just beginning to eat when someone sat across from me. It wasn't one of Ryan's crew. It was a girl I didn't know very well, Ava Sinclair. Smart, confident, and someone who had always seemed like she didn't care about the social hierarchy. She studied me for a moment, almost like she was sizing me up. Then she spoke. "You know, you didn't just beat Ryan," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. "You humiliated him." I didn't respond right away. I took a bite of my food, chewing slowly, trying to process what she was saying. I had never meant to humiliate anyone. I had just been standing my ground, showing him that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. But Ava's words hit me differently. She leaned in a little closer. "But that's what makes it worse for him. You ended it. No grand brawl. No shouting. You just made him look weak." I set my fork down, feeling the weight of her words sink in. It wasn't just about a fight. It was about perception. I had made Ryan look helpless in front of everyone. And in a place like Lincoln High, where image was everything, that was something people didn't forget. She paused, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Just be careful. Ryan's dad is on the school board. You think he's going to let this slide?" I met her gaze, unfazed. "Does it look like I care?" Ava exhaled, shaking her head. She stood up, picking up her tray. "You should. Watch your back." As she walked away, I felt a strange shift inside me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. Ava had given me a warning. But she had also given me a choice. I could let this go, pretend it never happened, or I could face the storm that was surely coming. Later that day, the reality of what Ava had said sank in. This wasn't just about a bully who had been put in his place. It wasn't about a quick victory in the cafeteria. No, this was bigger. Ryan's father was powerful. He had influence in this school. And I knew he wouldn't let things go easily. But I wasn't going to back down. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. Because if there was one thing I had learned from that moment in the cafeteria, it was that standing your ground isn't always about throwing punches. Sometimes, it's about making sure the truth is louder than the lies. As the days passed, the tension at Lincoln High only grew. Whispers, rumors, and stares followed me everywhere I went. Ryan, once the undisputed king of the school, now kept his distance, his silence louder than any insult he could have thrown my way. He still walked with his friends. But there was a noticeable shift in his posture, more guarded, less confident. He had learned a hard lesson. Sometimes, even the strongest can be humbled by someone who isn't afraid to stand their ground. But that wasn't the end of it. I knew better than to think it would just fade away. Ryan's father, with his connections on the school board, wasn't the type to let a slight go unpunished. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "You think you're tough? You got lucky today. Watch your back." I wasn't surprised. I had known this was coming. The real battle was just beginning. I had to make a choice. Let it slide, or take a stand and make sure Ryan and everyone else understood who I really was. The next day, I walked into school with a clear resolve. I wasn't alone. Ava and a couple of other students who had witnessed the fight stood by me, ready to back me up. We marched straight to the principal's office. The truth, as it turned out, was undeniable. Ryan's father couldn't twist the facts. And I wasn't punished. When Ryan came back to school, he was different, quieter, subdued. He understood. He had lost, not just a fight, but his arrogance. And that, in the end, is what people remember. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about throwing punches. It's about making sure the truth is louder than the lies. If you've enjoyed this story and the lessons learned, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more life stories.